Okay, let's get going. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth annual Julian Francis Abel Out of the Shadows Public History Symposium. My name is Melissa Ziobro, and I am a public historian here at Monmouth University in beautiful West Long Branch, New Jersey. I will be your host this morning. So if at any point you have any technical difficulties or need anything, go ahead and reach out to me in the chat. If you are not from within the Monmouth University community, we are located in central New Jersey, just a mile from the beach and roughly an hour from New York or Philadelphia, depending, of course, on traffic. We offer innovative academic programs, individual faculty attention, and nationally ranked Division I athletic teams. Our beautiful campus has not one, but two National Register listed buildings, the Guggenheim Memorial Library and the Great Hall at Shadow Lawn, which you can see here. The Great Hall is, of course, what brings us all together today. The Great Hall was listed on the State Register of Historic Places in 1977, on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978, and it was even named a National Historic Landmark in 1985. So I have found that when people discuss the Great Hall, they often mention that President Woodrow Wilson spent some time at the original Shadow Lawn, which is not even this one. It's a wooden mansion that burned down on the site prior to this one being constructed. Or they might mention that this building featured as Daddy Warbucks' mansion in the movie Annie. But rarely do I hear people mention that this building was designed in large part by a pioneering African American architect, Julian Abele, who you can see here. Julian worked for the renowned architectural firm of Horace Trumbauer. So, my students and I, along with many people across campus, have been working since at least 2020 to really try to change that. The initial class project my museums and archives students and I worked on were to create a LibGuide, which is kind of a research portal and has all kinds of information about both the Great Hall and about Julian Abele. It includes, of course, an interview with Abel's biographer, Drex Spurlock Wilson, who we are fortunate to have on the call with us today. I do, of course, want to recommend that everybody get themselves a copy of Drex's book, which is just fabulous. So in addition to the original LibGuide or research portal that my students created, we also started this annual public history symposium. We wanted to talk about Julian Abele every single year. I think sometimes when you want to honor a person, you name a building after them or you do a project for them, and then it's over, right? It kind of becomes static. We wanted to make sure that we were talking about Julian every single year, keeping his legacy on our campus alive and well. And so in this annual symposium, we discuss work that is being done to honor Julian Abele, to preserve the Great Hall on our campus, but we also talk about work to honor and preserve the legacy of Julian Abele off campus, because his legacy is so far reaching. And we also want to make sure that we are telling other untold stories in his honor. So you'll hear a little bit of all that today. With that, let me stop talking and introduce our first speaker as we get here into the program. First up, we have a many times over published author and beloved New Jersey history scholar, Rick Geffken. Rick is going to talk to us a little bit about the state of New Jersey's new Black Heritage Trail, focusing specifically on sites in Monmouth County. Now, this is of interest in general, but specifically because we are trying to get the Great Hall listed on New Jersey's Black Heritage Trail. So, Rick, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Melissa. Let me bring up the presentation. Can you see that, Melissa?
Perfect.
Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and special thanks to my friend Melissa for inviting me to talk this morning. I'm honored to do so. I will tell you that over the course of the last several years, I have learned so much about the rich and deep heritage of Black folks in Monmouth County, New Jersey, writ large, that I was never exposed to when I was in school, even through graduate school in New Jersey. So we're going to give you a brief survey. By no means is this exclusive. It doesn't include everything, and we will ask for questions at the end if that's okay with you. Here's a very old map that a lot of you may be familiar with, 1851 of Monmouth County. And of course, most of Monmouth County history, as it has been written up to the last, I don't know, 40 or 50 years, focused on the white settlers with a sprinkling of information about the Lenape folks that were here. And only rarely were the wonderful achievements of Black folks and their contributions to our history spoken about. That's all changed, which I'm happy to hear. We're going to talk a little bit this morning about where it all began, and then we're going to kind of go around some significant spots in Monmouth County that I've come to know lately. A lot of my Black friends have helped me understand the importance of these sites. Some of their families were very involved in them. And so again, kind of an overview of things that are important as part of what we hope will be added to the Black Heritage Trail. To date, unfortunately, as the state grinds along, as bureaucracies are wont to do, only, as far as I know, is the T. Thomas Fortune building in Red Bank on that trail. I know that's going to change soon. And so we'll show you some reasons why that should be. Okay, it all began actually in Monmouth County in Tinton Falls, which is several miles from where I sit and a little bit west of Monmouth University. Little village still to this day, when a man named, he called himself at least, Colonel Lewis Morris, came up. And where he came from is interesting. He was actually a Welshman who had spent a lot of his career and earned his fortune in Barbados. He was among the early Barbadian Quakers, believe it or not, who, when the English took over that particular Caribbean island, were involved in the early enslavement of Africans, importing them over to help them, these white folks, make their fortunes. It's a pretty famous image here of a couple of Quaker people. You can see the man on the right holding some tobacco leaves. And in the background, as always in these kinds of images, you see some enslaved people who are working on presumably their plantations. Well, it turns out that Lewis Morris and his brother Richard owned several plantations in Barbados. In the mid 17th century, they found that there were other opportunities up here on the North American continent, and so the tale begins. One of the interesting things about the enslaved people that we know, and it's very rare to have documentation, is that what was described by Lewis Morris as his personal servant, aka his enslaved man named Yaf, had this really, really fascinating background that I've actually investigated. We think he was probably born somewhere, obviously in Africa, or perhaps his parents were, maybe Senegambia. We find that by the mid 1640s, let's say, he finds himself in Barbados, working for Lewis Morris. He's obviously a very bright guy, picks up languages very quickly, and is elevated and promoted, if such a thing is possible, to be Lewis Morris's personal servant. Around 1667 or so, he's brought up to Tinton Falls, where Lewis Morris in 1675 buys into a struggling and new bog iron mine. They're there, of course, at Tinton Falls because it had the largest natural waterfall south of the Great Falls in Passaic, the source of power. And as I found out a couple of years ago on a trip to England, what's fascinating about this man Yap is that when Lewis Morris dies in 1691, he wills him to, of all people, William Penn, and William Penn brings him to England, where he frees him about 1703. A wonderful story for another time. But this is the beginning of enslavement in Monmouth County, as far as we know, because on the journey from Barbados to Tinton Falls, actually New York at first, Lewis Morris brings at least 60 to 70 of his enslaved plantation workers with him. He installs some in a place called Morrisania, his deceased brother's plantation in the South Bronx, still has that same name. And the rest went to Tinton Falls, where they labored under harsh conditions, as you would expect. We were fortunate to find out a lot about them over the years, and Rich Veit, also from Monmouth University, believes, as others do, that a lot of these people, both men and women, were buried somewhere on the property that Lewis Morris owned in Tinton Falls. And this past Juneteenth, several of us got together and put up a memorial plaque to honor the folks who shall remain, with the exception of Yap and a few others, unnamed, but we certainly know that they contributed mightily to the formation of this state and this country. And so that is a permanent installation in Tinton Falls. So skipping around in history quite a bit, I'm sure everyone is very familiar that during the Revolution, one of the turning points was the Battle of Monmouth Courthouse, which happened roughly in the Freehold-Manalapan area of Monmouth County. It was George Washington and the Continentals, backed with some local militia and some militia from out of state of New Jersey, against Henry Clinton, who was taking the British troops who had left Philadelphia across New Jersey, trying to get them, which he eventually does, to Sandy Hook and then up to New York. And so this clash turns out to be at Freehold on a very hot summer day, as you can see, in 1778. This is an apocryphal image that was painted 100 years later. One of the interesting things about this image is that there are nothing but white faces in this image. And it, of course, ignores the contributions of men on both sides. Here's about where it happened. There's the little town of Freehold now. It was named after a little village to the left bottom called Monmouth Courthouse. Of course, it was a physical courthouse building as well. It turns out that some other scholars have done a lot of research, and there were quite a number of men of color at that battle, over 800 by best estimates, some of whom are named, a lot of whom are anonymous, of course, including one very, very prominent man who was a non-combatant, but very influential in George Washington's life. And here's a French image, as it turns out, of George Washington with his campaign tent that he had all through the Revolution. And way in the background, as always, is that man who was his personal attendant, but he was also his enslaved man, a guy named Billy Lee. And Billy Lee was with George Washington throughout the Revolution, most of whose battles, you know, were fought in New Jersey. Billy Lee was enslaved during that time, and he, after the war, went to Mount Vernon with George Washington. And in George Washington's final will and testament, when he dies in 1799, of the over 300 enslaved people at Mount Vernon, Billy Lee was the one and only person that he manumitted. But we know that Billy Lee was with Washington at the Battle of Monmouth, an important recognition there. Today, of course, it's pretty impressive, open to the public. They've done a good job of honoring a lot of these people at the very interesting museum on site, worthwhile trip. Also during the war, some phenomenal things happened that a lot of people may or may not know. One of which was that so-called refugees, both black and white, people who were loyal to the British and who were being harassed by the rebels, who we think of as patriots, wound up retreating to Sandy Hook, which comes under the full control of the British in 1776. That lighthouse was a little bit less than 20 years old at that point, and they put a very rudimentary camp at the base of that lighthouse. And it's important to our history in that these folks, when they got there, spent a lot of time plotting against the people who were in rebellion in Monmouth County, and they were making forays from Sandy Hook, which at various times in its existence was not only a peninsula as it is today, but also an island, as you can see in this image. And they would come in and plunder for supplies and even capture as many folks as they could. A couple of years before this happened, we have, and I found this at the Monmouth County archives, lists of enslaved people and the folks that own them. And I should correct myself. On the list are only the names of the enslavers, and the people who were enslaved are given a number, not even identified by gender in this case. So we have to use other documentation to find out who's who. But interesting, a man who lived in what is today Rumson, named John Corliss, had more enslaved people on his little farm than anybody else. He had 4, as you see. The rest of the list, which I'm not showing you, a few other people had 4, but none had more than that. And we also find out that about 3 or 4 years later, one of his men, enslaved men, young man, is named Titus, mother of Sarah, who's also enslaved by the Corliss family, escapes, and John Corliss takes out this ad in both New York and Philadelphia papers, hoping to recover this man. And he offers a pretty substantial reward. £3 was quite a bit of money in those days. And this man evolves to be one of the most famous, if not the most famous, Black fighter in the Revolution. But we have to note he fought for the British because he winds up in Sandy Hook. He becomes notorious and changes his name, and he comes down to us as Colonel Ty, which was an honorific. The British never actually promoted Black people. But he led a group of people called the Black Brigade on all kinds of expeditions into a country that he knew very well, the Monmouth County heartland, to, as I mentioned, secure supplies and to create and harass as many folks as he could, create chaos and harass folks. One of his most astounding and audacious raids was in a town I used to live in, then part of Middletown, a little village called Homedale. And the reason that Colonel Ty and his men came in there was that, as you see, 3 of the notorious rebel leaders, 2 of them Smocks and their cousin Gilbert Van Matter, lived in the then called Pleasant Valley section. Colonel Ty, on a June summer morning, takes a boat across Sandy Hook Bay with a number of men, and in broad daylight comes galloping down through, Shrewsbury into Middletown, and kidnaps at least these 3 men and creates further havoc on the farm. That's a little shot of the cemetery of the Smock family where some of these men are buried, actually. What he also does is he spikes Barnes Smock's cannon. And what that means is he takes either a bayonet, let's say, or a physical spike and pounds it into the cannon, which Barnes Smock used to warn the militia when the British were coming in, or the refugees, as they were called, coming in to attack various farms. So he disabled that signal and takes these 3 men back to Sandy Hook. They go to New York. The 2 officers are released in a prisoner exchange. And Ty does this quite a lot during the Revolutionary War and is very famous for it. As a matter of fact, the National Park Service is working now to commemorate the incidents in Colonel Ty's life, and they'll be exhibiting quite a nice walk-through museum in a couple of months for the 250th anniversary of the country. Famously, too, Ty takes part in an incident that involves another one of our revolutionary heroes, and that is a man named Joshua Huddy, who had married into a family and took over what was then the Hart's Tavern. In this painting, he is depicted as defending himself with one of his servant girls, a woman named Lucretia Emmons, against a raid and a siege of his home in September of 1780 against Colonel Ty and the Black Brigade, and also some white refugees that had come through. Interestingly to me, and I think we're going to have to change this, is that where this happened, you notice that, of course, Captain Joshua Huddy is noted, his wife, then the widow of a man named Hart, and it only says that a party of Tories besieged and set fire to the house. It completely leaves out Colonel Ty, which will be redressed, I'm sure, in the future. We don't have any real images of Colonel Ty. There's been some recreations. It's doubtful that he wore any kind of uniform, as most of these Black Brigade folks wore pretty much what they escaped with, although they may have been supplemented at some point with uniforms. Melissa, is my screen still up there?
Yes, sir. I see Middletown. With
Okay, good. All right. Okay, great. So the next thing I want to do is take you through a place in Middletown village during the Revolution and the years thereafter. And that's a painting that is at the Monmouth County Historic Association. You might know that building today as Malpit Hall, okay, which was part of the Taylor family holdings through the early 18th century and into the 19th, actually. And recently, the Monmouth County Historic Association put up a very award-winning and informative display about these enslaved folks called Beneath the Floorboards. And that is because under literally the floorboards, they found a lot of tokens and artifacts left behind by some of the enslaved people, some of whose names we know and some we don't. And horrifyingly enough, also in the excavations in the back, they found what is a set of shackles. So these folks were, even though in the depiction here look like they are nicely dressed and perhaps working inside the house, we also know that they worked outside and were restrained in all the typical ways. One of the women we know most about, who was born enslaved and later manumitted due to the Act for the Gradual Abolition of Slavery in 1804 in New Jersey, was this woman, Betsy Van Cleef, so-called. And I would urge you, if you ever get a chance, to go see that exhibit at Marpet Hall. You'll learn a lot about her, the family, and the conditions with which through which she had to live. The picture there is what is today the Taylor Butler House, which is a bigger house that was built later on the property by the Taylor family. And Betsy made the transition to work in that house as well, and later on dies, as you can see, in 1883. Not too far away in Lincroft, a section of Middletown, is a very famous, over the last few years, historic site that I was privileged enough to be on a committee wherein we restored a cemetery that had been overlooked and overgrown for probably the better part of a century. It's now the Cedar View Cemetery, and these are folks that were on our board as well, from those families, Reeves and Chameau and Smack families. At a picture of a plaque that Middletown Township was nice enough to donate for us at the site. It's an interesting backstory. A white man named John B. Crawford donated, or I should say sold actually, for $60 this piece of property. It's about 3 acres in 1850 in November. And what we think happened here was it's a direct result. He sold his property to 14 black men as a direct result of the previous April's Fugitive Slave Act, which was passed by our Congress in Washington, D.C., which said that there were rewards for anybody who were mandated actually to return escaped slaves. And as you would expect, slaves had been escaping all through the period of enslavement, but the Southern plantation owners convinced Congress that this is a threat to their livelihood. So when our federal government endorsed the Fugitive Slave Act, there were severe penalties for anybody who aided or abetted or sheltered escapees. And so what we think happened was that J.B. Crawford sold some property to these men so they would have property deeds which would be able to help them prove they were not enslaved, since enslaved folks could not own property. And that may be one small but probably significant way that they would be sheltered from being captured and taken back south, where, by the way, none of them were from. As part of our restoration, we've spent several years cleaning up the property, standing up headstones that have been fallen down or pushed down over the years. Some were buried, and we exposed those as well. And one of our members, Rob Shomo, has in fact documented the almost 200 souls that are in that cemetery. One of those in the corner left there in red, at the very front of the cemetery, is Silas Reeves. And he's important. He's related to a lot of those folks in the picture I showed you. But it's important that he's there because on his tombstone, it said he was one of the U.S. colored troops. And we know that there are over a dozen of Black Civil War veterans, most of these from Monmouth County, who had served in the Civil War, fighting obviously against the Confederacy. Some of these men, amazingly enough, had to leave Monmouth County to Philadelphia to enroll because they were so anxious to serve and fight against the Confederacy. Most of them came back, survived the war, and are buried in Cedar View today. I hope you know, and it's worthwhile to look into the history of these, not just these men, but the thousands of U.S. colored troops who fought against the Confederacy during the war. Also, a startling event to me that happened as late as 1886 was, as you can see possibly in that plaque, was the lynching of a Black man in Eatontown, New Jersey, an old town just a little south of Shrewsbury today. I'm sure you know the name Eatontown. And again, a fascinating story, unknown until very recently by most of us. Turns out that a man named Samuel Johnson, picture here, imaginary picture here, imaginarily drawn here, since we have no images of him, was a former jockey when he was a young man, had been, we think, enslaved to the Laird family in Coltsneck. As time goes on, he's also manumitted and becomes kind of an itinerant farm worker. He marries and has, as you see, 5 children. And he lives what is today along Route 35. Up top left in this map is where Eatontown was and is. And along what was then Poplar Road, his house was there, significantly not too far from a white family named the Herberts. And in March of 1886, the daughter of the Herberts, a woman named Angelina, went to her family and said that she had been attacked by a man who identified himself as Mingo Jack, which was interesting. Samuel Johnson's nickname was Mingo Jack because as a young man, he had ridden a very famous racehorse called Mingo. And of course, he earned that nickname. And according to her story, which is as old as we've had enslavement in this country, this man, Black man, attacked her on her way home and said to her, "Do you know Mingo Jack?" So the whole thing belies credibility. You know, who would identify himself if this happened? But it was another excuse for white people to get up in arms about the depredation of a Black man on a white woman. When her parents find this out, they get the constable involved. He and her father go to Mingo Jack's house, and they take him off to the little jail in Eatontown, pictured there on the left. It was a little one-room jail cell, also up by a little lake you could see in the image. And then the constable proceeds to go downtown, Eatontown, into a bar at night, and makes a point of announcing to everyone that he wouldn't be surprised if someone took retribution on Mingo Jack. And he riles up these drunks, frankly, in a bar, a bunch of white guys, and at midnight, roughly, they break into the jail cell. And
we're broadcasting.
Can you hear me?
You're good. Sorry, I just had to mute somebody. Go ahead. You okay, Rick?
Am I on now?
Yep, you're all set.
Okay, sorry. So these white guys, thugs, break into that little jail cell. They beat Samuel Johnson almost to death. And then, not satisfied with their handiwork, they decide that they're going to really make a lesson for this man. And as you see this article in the New York Times, they lynch him. And on the portal of the jail door cell, they hang him and leave him for the evening until some friendly folks cut him down. And this whole incident creates quite a stir for several months. These men who assaulted him in the only recorded, and the operative word there is recorded, lynching of a black man in New Jersey, they are taken to not even a court, it's a coroner's trial. Everyone denies any guilt on it. They don't know anything, and no one's ever punished for this. And when this history was discovered several years ago by some friends of mine, including Sandra Thompson on the left, she first erects a stone with a plaque on it. And then in the last several years, a whole bunch of us got together. We collected soil at the location of where we believe that jail was on what is now Wampum Brook in Eatontown. And that soil was collected in a ceremony and is down in Montgomery, Alabama, with Brian Stevenson's wonderful EJI in one of the staggering number of jars commemorating places in this country where Black people were enslaved and then lynched one way or another. On a happier note, much happier, of course, we have this. In Red Bank, there is now at this location, and this was the opening ceremony, and my friend, Dr. Walter Grayson, also from Monmouth University, formerly is at the ribbon cutting of the T. Thomas Fortune Foundation House, which was named after a man, again, who most of us had never heard of, although he was quite prominent, T. Thomas Fortune, who lived in that house in Red Bank. Timothy Thomas Fortune was enslaved, born in about 1856 in Florida, and he gets educated and migrates north. And in 1901, he moves into what he called Maple Hall, that reconstructed house now, with his wife, Carrie Smiley, and becomes very prominent. Now, he moves to Red Bank for a specific reason, because he's very prominent in New York, and he is now within walking distance of the train station where he can commute to New York every day to do what he is most famous for. He was a newspaper man, and he started at least 3 different Black oriented newspapers in New York, including this one, to talk about Black lives and post-Civil War happenings, of course, Jim Crow and everything else. And also famously, he hired for writers 2 of the most renowned journalists, Ida B. Wells and W.B. Du Bois, who were working for him for quite a while, and then made their own way in the world of fame, owing to what T. Thomas Fortune had done originally. One of, as you can see, the most influential Black journalists in the United States. And as always, especially in the years where I was growing up, unmentioned in any history book. I had never heard the name till Gilda Rogers and other folks who restored that house brought him to public attention locally and then, of course, nationally as well. Moving over to Freehold, one of the greatest contributions made by Black folks in our county starting in the early 20th century was the Court Street School, literally down the block from where the Monmouth County Courthouse is. It was a school that was, although there were integrated schools in Freehold in those days, it was a school that was populated by the Black children in that area of Freehold. And its contributions just can't be counted, to be honest with you. In 1941, in this picture, and there's a graduation picture for almost every year, this woman right down here, who is a young graduate, goes on to accomplish innumerable things for not only her community, but also for New Jersey. Her name was Lily Ham. Here she is in a graduation photo and little write-up in her Freehold High School yearbook. She was a wonderful scholar. She winds up going to Trenton State University, where she studied. She was the only Black woman in her class there. She goes to England for a year to further her graduate studies, and then amazingly decides to come back and devote the rest of her life to working and teaching at the Court Street School. I was fortunate enough, in an unfortunate circumstance, to be at her funeral this past June in Freehold, which was enormously popular for someone who had done so much for her community. She is also, by the way, the aunt of Dr. Walter Grayson that we talked about before. The Court Street School now is used as a community center. They honor not only her heritage, but all the folks that went through there. And it's a very, very strong part of that little section of Freehold as well. So if you want more information, I'd have to give my kudos to this woman who's no longer with us. Lenora McKay was very, very influential in a lot of what I found out because she wrote this book very early in the 1970s. She was from Freehold and had done a lot of research into the personalities and folks. That was the first time I'm aware that these folks were given their due. And from that, an awful lot has come out about these contributions that Black people have made, not only to Monmouth County, but beyond. And I'm happy to tell you that there are any number of people researching their families. There are scholars and intellectuals throughout New Jersey looking at not only Black contributions in New Jersey and Monmouth County, but how these folks are fundamentally important to the founding of this country. So that'll give you a little information about what I hope, including with Monmouth University, of course, will become part of Monmouth County and New Jersey's Black Heritage Site. If you want a little bit more in depth, there's my email, Rick G, that's 0817. And I can tell you how to get a copy of the book, or I'm sure they're in local libraries. And Melissa, I'm open to anybody's questions if you'd like at this point.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Let me stop your sharing for a moment. All right, everybody, we've been listening to New Jersey author and scholar Rip Geffken provide some context about African-American history in Monmouth County more broadly, and some of the sites that either are or we hope soon will be on New Jersey's new Black Heritage Trail, which, as I've noted, we've applied to get the Great Hall on. So fingers crossed on that. At this time, I would open the floor to questions for Rick. You can unmute unmute yourself and ask a question, or if you'd like to type your question in the chat, I would be happy to ask it for you. So who would like to get that first question in? Actually, maybe while people are typing or looking for their unmute button, I'll throw the first question out, Rick. As someone who's been doing Monmouth County history for decades now, what are some of the biggest frustrations for you as far as the absences in the historical record? You talked about this a little bit. We're trying to tell more complete stories because there have been so many injustices done, but it's difficult, right, when we can't find the record. So how have you been navigating that, and how are other scholars navigating that?
So it is interesting. As I said, certainly in the early days of enslavement in this state, Black people are rarely even named. But yet we find occasionally their names and some incidents in their lives. For instance, with Titus, who becomes Colonel Ty, through thousands and thousands of records of runaway slaves, so-called. A lot of you probably know about the Cornell University project. There are hundreds and hundreds, I don't even know the number, of runaway ads posted in New Jersey, which usually at least give these enslaved people a name, almost always only a first name. We also find in wills, in the surrogate's office in Monmouth County, for instance, or through personal contacts, sometimes these people who are bequeathed down to the next generation by their white and slave owners, their names. Occasionally, if there's a court document where there's a dispute about who owns somebody, you'll find a name too. But to answer your question directly, the frustration is that while we know that hundreds and hundreds of enslaved people in Monmouth County were here, had lives and families, we have scant little documentation. I'm counting on a lot of folks being interested in the future in their own family records, finding names and descriptions of these folks in their personal documents, letters, perhaps, whatever we have. So it takes a little bit of work, and fortunately and unfortunately, when you have somebody like Colonel Ty, there's enough primary documentation where we can put together something about his life. Other folks are just, even if they're mentioned in a runaway slave ad, that's it. We see their name once. There's hardly ever a follow-up if they've ever been retaken or where they wind up. A good source, of course, are Black cemeteries, such as Cedar View and others, where we can try to trace these folks. But I'm always surprised when new information comes out. So really good question.
Again, everyone, you can feel free to type a question in the chat and I'd be happy to read it for you, or you can unmute and ask a question. This is a question in the chat from one of my students asking about how digitization has potentially made your work easier over the years as more and more materials get digitized and put online.
It's a really good question. It makes it easier in this sense. In the old days, like a lot of us, not that long ago, by the way, probably 20 years ago, I and other people had to go to archives and scan through microfiche or whatever they might have had. I spent a long time in New York at the National Census Record Bureau trying to find out about people. And it doesn't really help you when you're trying to trace Black people's heritages until after 1870, when they start appearing, of course, after the Civil War, in census records. Before that, they're listed as check marks at best. So in some ways, digitization has helped because I can sit home on a cold winter night and call up information. On the other hand, it complicates your life because there are pieces of information that people believe to be true that may or may not be true, and you have to sift through that and try to figure out what's accurate and what's not accurate. I'm in the process of writing a book about Colonel Ty and Joshua Huddy, as a matter of fact, and their sources are confused about these two prominent men. And as you would expect, the legends grow and change and stories get repeated. So digitalization of records helps. And it's also just one step, so it's not the be all and the end all.
That's so interesting. I think that some would hope, well, that's the Holy Grail. Everything will just be online and we'll be able to have all of the answers. But your perspective really frames that it's not that easy. Drek, I'm going to put you on the spot for a moment, if I may. Julian Abel's biographer, Drek Wilson, is on the call, and he typed a comment in the chat that Edward Knight's Stony Brook in Middletown was designed by Julian Abel in 1927. Drek, are you in a position to tell us anything more on that at the moment, or no? Hold on, I'm going to have you unmute. I'm gonna see. I put Drek on the spot. This is there you go, Drek.
Okay. Edward Knight was a financier and banker in Philadelphia. And Stony Brook was his summer home, which his family moved to. And I believe that Stony Brook is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. And Edward Knight was a client of Horace Trumbauer, I think on maybe 3 different buildings besides or other than Stony Brook.
Well, thank you very much for that. That's something I did not know, but I'm certainly going to look into that, Drek. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Drek. Okay, anyone else want to unmute and ask a question? Oops. Okay, so I love when an event goes according to schedule. We were scheduled at 9:45 and we're pretty close. At 9:45, we were scheduled to have a brief break. So you can stay on the Zoom, certainly, but if anybody wants to go and refill their coffee, run to the restroom, we'll be picking up at 10 o'clock with Rachael Goldman from Brookdale Community College, who is doing some fascinating research into the tiles, I believe, in the Solarium of the Great Hall at Monmouth. So you don't want to miss that. Thank you so much, Rick, for helping us have this broader knowledge of Black history and heritage in Monmouth County as we now begin to focus more on Julian Abel specifically. So we're going to pause and I will see everybody at 10 o'clock to talk about the Great Hall Solarium. Thank you. Well, you guys upstairs, don't panic. Rachel, are you there? Do you want to test your screen sharing while we have 2 minutes?
Mm-hmm. Can you see that?
I can, and yep, the only thing is I'm seeing it in like speaker mode, not presenter mode, if you know what I mean.
Oh, okay. How do I do that?
I do not know how to control it on your end right now. Okay, so I see the PowerPoint slide, but I see, the small slides on the side.
Oh, okay.
And then when you go into presentation mode, I'm seeing speaker view, not presentation mode.
Okay.
You can run it like that.
Okay. Uh, um,
Are you on a Mac?
no, I'm on a two screen.
Okay, can you stop that maybe? Perhaps that's the problem.
Um, yeah, hmm, uh, uh, mm,
Now I see all your
all
thumbs.
them. Yeah. Mm, okay. Display settings. There.
Perfect. And look at that, it's 10 o'clock. So as I said, I love a program that's on schedule. Are you feeling good, Rachel?
I feel great.
Okay, perfect. So welcome back, everybody, to the 4th annual Julian Francis Abele Out of the Shadows Public History Symposium. Again, I am your host, Melissa Ziobro. I'm a public historian here at Monmouth University. I hope everybody had a chance to stretch their legs and refill their coffee, because now we're diving in for the next 2 hours. We have a series of presentations, which, as I noted earlier, will talk about scholarship focused on Julian Abele at Monmouth University, at other locations throughout the country, and we'll look at some other untold stories in Julian Abele's honor. And the point of all this, right, is to keep Julian Abele's memory, his legacy alive and well. As I said earlier, I think sometimes when we intend to honor a person, we name something for them, or we do an exhibit for them, and it's finite, it's done, that's it, right? But with the symposium, we hope to keep Julian Abele's name, his legacy alive and well on our campus of Monmouth University and beyond. So with that, I will introduce our next speaker, who's Rachael Goldman from Brookdale Community College, who will be, as you can see here on the slide, discussing the Solarium in the Great Hall. If at any point anybody has any issues, you don't think you are seeing or hearing what you are supposed to, just go ahead and drop me a line in the chat. Rachael will speak for roughly 15 minutes, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. So take it away, Rachael.
Thanks. I would like to begin by thanking Professor Melissa Ziobro for her generosity and enthusiasm in having this research be presented for the first time. I would like to thank Provost Rich Veit for his continued support on this research. My thanks go to David Rago and Suzanne Perot, as well as the Tile Heritage Foundation for their swift identification and guiding me to the appropriate sources. Consistent with the mission of the symposium, discussing untold history, the research on the subject of the Solarium on the top floor of the Great Hall at Monmouth University does not begin in any typical fashion because of the absence of information about it. Studying any ancient history requires the storyteller to recreate the information that was lost, and the only information that I had to rely on were the tiles. Back in December 2022, I came in contact with the Solarium quite by accident. And my first thought was, how does anyone get any work done in this office with this decorative scheme? I would be so distracted. And unlike the tiles in the ladies' bathroom on the basement floor, the tiles in the Solarium were much easier to view. It took me a while to go through the standardized methodology, who made the tiles, who installed them, how much was the cost, and alternatively for me, how much would this be valued at now? And what was the purpose? I immediately reached out to the university librarian, Kurt Wagner, and Provost Rich Veit, and some other historians. I was informed that a fire destroyed most of the records and that if I found anything, I should inform them. Then I turned to the larger decorative arts community, especially those studying and working with ceramic tiles. Based upon my preliminary knowledge of decorative arts tiles, I originally placed them in the arts and crafts movement, roughly 19-teens, 1920s. This process began in December 2022 and allowed me to consider and explore the American art tile and ceramic history, especially in New Jersey. I reached out to David Rago and Suzanne Perot, who were the most naturally recognized authorities on the subject and also located in Lambertville, New Jersey. They understood my urgency. Originally, Suzanne Perot thought that the tiles were made by the Batchelder Tiles Company, who were also contemporaries and made similar Mesoamerican style tiles. But the Batchelder Company informed me that they were not made by them. At this point, I was just trying to identify the makers of the tiles. Now, the simplest idea and most definitive way of identify these tiles was a suggestion that someone who shall remain nameless suggested to me to find a loose tile and remove it from the wall and look on the back and then put it back on the wall. For considerations, I did not follow any of those suggestions, nor do I recommend it. But it was suggested to me to contact the Tile Heritage Foundation. Joseph Taylor, who is the president of the organization, enthusiastically responded to my call in December of 2023, even writing in an email and supplying me with this picture. Will wonders never cease? He identified the tiles as a part of the American Encaustic Tile Company and informed me that it was Leon Solon, and who was the designer and helped me with the bibliography. I was able to move on from my research from there. The American Encaustic Tile Company was one of the leading tile companies in the United States during the 1875 and 1939 period. They were founded in New York City in 1875, but established a factory in Zanesville, Ohio. This is the factory. There were tiles that were intended to compete with the English tiles that were selling in the United States for use in fireplaces and other architectural locations. Today, one still can purchase their tiles on the secondary marketplace with a variety of sources of possibilities for designs. It is interesting to note that the American Encaustic Tile Company really marketed for making fireplaces instead of the Solarium, and they were located, and as the Solarium also has a fountain composition. By 1890, they were the largest tile company in the world, and the small town of Zanesville nearly tripled in size over a 30-year period as more people found work with the company. The new plant opened in 1892, and at the opening ceremony, it was attended by then Governor William McKinley, with 20,000 people in attendance. That's this location. And its first location in New York was 140 West 23rd Street and eventually moved to 16 East 41st Street. And it needed a more conspicuous location in Manhattan to show off their wares to a higher clientele. All of this has been removed in 2013, though. In 1900, the American Encaustic Tile won a gold medal at the Expositionale Universelle in Paris and at the Pan American Exposition in Buffalo in 1901, where incidentally then President William McKinley was assassinated. As we can see, this is the lobby of the New York office designed by Leon Solon, and this is what he wanted to market in the 19-teens. And this is a detail of the reception room as well, and you can see the tiles from the Solarium. As the American Encaustic Tile Company moved into the 19-teens, the company lost an interest in the embossed tile and began marketing a new inventive form called the art tile. In 1912, the company purchased a factory in Maurer, New Jersey, that had previously been doing business for Atlantic Tile and Faience Company. New Jersey has always had a strong connection to pottery, clay, and tile manufacturing craft. Maurer, New Jersey, is a residential neighborhood of Perth Amboy, New Jersey, and is north of the Route 440 approach to the Outer Bridge Crossing. Some questions arose about this new location and why it was set up there. Some thought that it had to do with the rich clay deposits in New Jersey. Others included the close proximity to New York and even near a port city. With American Encaustic's expansions throughout the United States, the company maintained their quality of service meeting the variety of needs of the consumers. From an advertisement in Sweet's catalog from 1923, it appears that the company was producing not only a variety of tile products, but also fixtures and accessories for bathrooms and other rooms of the house. That would make sense if a visitor were to look in the ladies' bathroom in the basement of the Great Hall. 1928 through 1929 proved to be a pivotal year not only for American Encaustic Tile, but for the world. During 1928, American Encaustic Tile completed alterations on the Philadelphia subway with identical tile in northern Hudson Tunnel. But as the stock market crashed, the company had financial difficulties and by 1937 were forced to close its doors. No conversation about American Encaustic Tile would be complete without a short biographical sketch of Léon-Victor Solon. He was absolutely pivotal in the success and recognition of the company and their tiles. He belonged to such a great French and British ceramic family. Everyone in his family had something to do with ceramics. He was even born in Stoke-on-Trent, which is where many of the long-established firms like Minton, Staffordshire, and most commonly recognized by Josiah Wedgwood. Solon was born into a career and was influenced by his father in the attraction of ancient Greek motifs, and he even has the name of an ancient Greek general. He created a new secessionist wear line right here in 1902. But in 1909, he immigrated to America, which was a surprise to many around him. And he brought with him a strong language of tile and ceramic work that easily translated into an appropriate vocabulary in America. Because there were so many firms in this area, including Gruby, Newcomb, Rookwood, Weller, Paul Revere Pottery, and many others. The field of history generally asks the question, why do events happen the way they do, and how do we know what we know? In this case, Léon-Victor Solon arrived at the right place at the right time and worked tirelessly to create a language that would be easily understood for consumers. There are only a few handful of tiles that have been documented as Solon's work, and when they arrive at auction, they command top dollar. Solon was in favor of polychromed artists working in architecture. Polychromed means painting in multicolor at the same time. Solon was frustrated by the absence of color on ancient marble sculpture. Now you know why I'm interested in this subject. In order to make his viewpoints known, he wrote a treatise called Principles of Polychrome in Architecture. And he also published in 1922 a journal in the Architectural Record. He liked the idea of even trying to hand color the white sculptures, almost like a coloring book. Where have we seen this before? And he has said this in 1922, almost 102 years ago. He said that Greek principles for color and general planning of color on detail and the coloring of the modeling over the doorway presented many debatable points for treatment, all of which were satisfactorily solved by the application of Greek polychrome methods. And that in this small selection that we have from magazines of the time, we see his fantastical machinations. This is two green elephants. We see a sacred dragon. And we also see something that would probably look out of a Persian miniature, possibly in the style of the Shahnameh. A version of the Greek sun god was known to be in existence in early 1915. It was first published in a decorative arts magazine called the International Studio in December 1915. The unknown critic in the sections, in the galleries, says of this masterpiece, the very interesting composition has sun god panel has been exhibited in the Architectural League, but has not been reproduced in any art magazine before. The possibilities of such faience decoration has been more apparent when the color scheme is seen, and that unfortunately it doesn't do it justice in the halftone. The jewel-like quality of the tile mosaic against the dull red background gives it almost a harmonious result and should be seen by every architect of taste. It has reached a high degree of attainment in this technique of the sculpture and is extremely interesting to art students, impulsed by its analogy to certain phases of early Egyptian, Chinese, and Korean art. The weird part about this is that the unknown artist in this has no byline, and the editor or writer of this quote is not known. I tried to find out who may have seen this in 1915 as the prototype, but the editor is correct about several items of interest. It is the Maya, and it is the influence for this iconographic image. The editor praises Solon for his work and also shows an admiration for ancient cultures that have not been given significant attention, and tries to show a cross currents of culture at the turn of the century as World War I raged on. The editor encourages viewers to contact Solon for future commissions, as Solon advertised available for consultation in offering design suggestions for specific tile treatments. The entire composition and set for Sun God was created in 1915, but it was showcased in 1928, Home and Garden Interior Design magazine. It shows that it had a long life. The audience geared for this magazine were women, and that they would have an influence in decoration of their homes. It was hoped that this time would spread widely and be bought. Frances Flynn Payne offers her opinion. The most successful of these designs of Maya or Aztec origin, which, though Mexican, truly American. The pre-colonial Mexican artists are the artistic heritage of the Western continent, an original and very logical source from which we may draw inspiration for our creative work. But still, unfortunately, it does not seem to have much traction and was not ordered nor assembled more than once. Solon was very proud of this entire theme, and it probably saddened him that no one wanted it. It's possible that it was assembled on a smaller scale without a fountain and the remaining wall tiles around the room, but I have not encountered a similar example. Solon was also responsible for reproducing colored tiles designed by Agustin Lazo for the Carlos Chavez Aztec Ballet and figure designs based on the indigenous art. At this time, the ancient civilizations of Mesoamerica were still being unearthed, and there was very little distinction among the Toltec, the Olmec, the Maya, and the Aztec. The differentiation didn't matter. They overlapped and were often confused. But what made Solon want to seek out these global historical subjects? In 1910s and 1920s, the field of archaeology in Mexico and Central America were a burgeoning example. The world was also entering into the Art Deco period of time. Mayan revival coincided very nicely with the smooth, clean lines of the almighty, powerful deities and the micro-deities. Frank Lloyd Wright was one of the champions for this field with his house, the Ennis House of Los Angeles. They rely on bas reliefs, and the pyramidal structure found favor with numerous buildings. It was also incorporated into jewelries with images of, in quote, grave goods and oxidized masks. But the image of the sun god was incorporated into these repeated motifs. According to another architect, Robert Stacy Judd, in 1924 through 1925, the word Maya was unknown to the layman. The subject of Maya culture was only of archaeological importance, and of that concerned with few exponents. As a word, Aztec was fairly known. From that angle, as a researcher, I gave more thought to this difference, and I presume so did Solon. Cities such as Palenque, Tikal, Chichen Itza, and Copan were fertile grounds to see on these sites, even if the archaeological methods were less than perfect. The study of Mayan glyphs were at the height of new scholarship, all integrated into a new design palette. Much has been studied about the Maya, but for the longest time, they were a misunderstood civilization that were thought to use regular bloodletting rituals just for the visions of the afterlife. Their ball courts were of infinite curiosity, but they were exquisite craftsmen in stone carving and wall painting, as well as vases within miniature scenes. In Maya art, the gods are depicted at all stages of lives, and the Mayan artisans chose to depict their gods performing all types of rituals. This is no more evident than in the site of Palenque. While it is not possible to land on an exact wall painting or wall carving that served as the influence for Solon's sun god, it is possible to see how he interpreted, borrowed, and integrated his vision, or what he appealed to him, and by extension, his clients. As seen in these panels, Maya sculptors celebrated the human form in the naturalistic way, portraying royal individuals as they sit, hold things, interact with one another. It must have been a hard sell to have these images of the Maya worshiping their deities in your living room, but maybe the solarium was a better option. Based on the decorative iconography, Dr. Keith Jordan of Fresno State University, a Maya specialist, explained that the archaeological work from Palenque most closely resembles this imagery. The exact panel that Solon used for the adapt the sun god was the Palenque cross, with two priests conducting ceremonial ritual, as you can see. It is also quite challenging to get clear pictures of the wall carvings and the glyphs because of the very location and the fragility of them. And then Solon left in 1925. He took on many other short jobs, but he would go on to other things. He would design tiles for Virginia Commonwealth University, assisted with coloration techniques at Rockefeller Center and the Philadelphia Museum of Art pediments. We don't hear from him again, but the solarium remained intact and in excellent condition with no restoration. That is rare for tiles of this type. The scholarship of Léon-Victor Solon and his coloration techniques, both in general tile work and through the sun god solarium centerpiece, is a popular example. There is no doubt that designers for the Great Hall Solarium were interested in creating an everlasting and exotic appearance for 1929. It also shows that global civilizations such as the Maya and even more far-reaching locales such as ancient Greek and Persian decorations are in the ordinary domain. It is my hope that by participating in this talk, some awareness can be given and more works can be found. Even as the world was plunging into the unknown for which they would not know solace for years, the solarium tiles are preserved as if they were installed yesterday. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel. It's so interesting to hear about the inside, right, of Julian Abele's great masterpiece, The Great Hall. We are out of time for questions. So what I'm going to ask Rachel to do is go ahead and, if she would like, put her contact info in the chat there, and anyone who would like can reach out. Thank you so much, Rachel. So next up on our schedule, we have Peter F. Rogers. So Peter is a retired judge, but also a tremendous photographer. And Julian Abele's biographer, again, Drek Wilson, who's on the call with us today, recommended that Peter share some of his beautiful photography with us. So this will give you an idea of the breadth and scope of Julian Abele's catalog off our lovely campus. So, Peter, you are up. Just let me know if you need anything as far as that screen share goes. Remember, it's the green button at the bottom of the Zoom. Okay, perfect. So I am seeing I'm seeing the Union League. Okay, now I see Vista on the Parkway. Go ahead.
Thank you, Melissa, especially for extending an invitation to me after I was unable to participate last year. And I want to thank Monmouth University for the invitation. I'm going to send out a shout out to my good friend, Drek Wilson. I met Drek, I guess, a couple of years ago when I was I'm still a member of the Athenaeum in Philadelphia. So thank you, Drek. And I want to give much attribution to Drek today for some of the slides that I'll be presenting. Now, I don't come from academia. I'm not a scholar. I'm a retired criminal defense lawyer and a criminal court judge in the city of Philadelphia. So that's about 40 years of work I've done. And the interesting thing is that approaching 2014, 2015, I had no idea, no clue whatsoever as to who Julian Francis Abele was. So I'd like to just share with you how I got to know him. And he is, in fact, a muse of mine. The photo that you see is of my copyrighted piece titled Vista on the Parkway. And I had no idea what the buildings were, except for the dome of the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul, which is the Catholic cathedral in Philadelphia. But what happened was I got transferred in 2012 to the family court from the criminal division. And within a 2-year period, 2014, they built a new family court. At that time, I had approximately 16 years of seniority, and judges, at least in Philadelphia, pick their chambers based on seniority. So I found myself over at the new family court building with 16 years of seniority, which bested most except for 3 baby judges who were assigned over there. So I took great pains to look out of every corner of that building, which is at 15th and Arch Street, looking for the perfect chambers. And I ran across a picture that you're seeing on your screen now, and which is now my copyrighted piece called Vista on the Parkway. I had no clue what I was taking a picture of. But every day when I chose that particular office, I would see eventually the Philadelphia Zoo balloon circling it now. That zoo balloon does not go up anymore. It belonged to ABC in Philadelphia. It ceased operating and going up at the Philadelphia Zoo, which is kind of like across the river away from the back of the art museum. Now, it gives the appearance, if you can see where the river is, that it is riding over the river. It is not going anywhere beyond the gates, the entry gates of the Philadelphia Zoo. It just would go straight up. And that's the view I would see every day. That is every day when the wind wasn't blowing and the balloon did not get dispatched. Eventually, I decided to inquire, and probably Googled, who owns these buildings or who did these buildings? What are they? And it was then, for the first time, that I discovered Julian Francis Abele. Now, I was a little fascinated by the fact that I learned that Julian's middle name was Francis, and so is mine. The next thing was that he was one of 8 children, and I'm one of 8. So I'm beginning to be intrigued about this man. I learned that he was an extraordinary architect. I understood that he took part in the design of many, many buildings in this country, but especially these 2 that are within the view of my piece. I might want to add that this picture was cropped from the view that my camera lens captured between 2 buildings. On the left, it would have been the Drexel building, and on the right, it would have been the downtown Sheraton Hotel. And I was able to just crop it, and this is what I got. This picture was obviously taken at a change of the season, and what you see is the dome of the Basilica of St. Peter and Paul. In the background where I've got my cursor, you're seeing basically Fairmount Park, which is perhaps one of the largest park systems in the country. Over here, anybody who knows anything about Philadelphia, you will know that the nuclear power plant in Pottstown, which is 37.5 miles away from Center City, you're seeing the draft, or I call it the smoke, but it is the draft from the towers, cooling towers. Here is a water tower known as Queen Lane Reservoir, and it is several miles from where I took this photo. The interesting thing about this photo, a lot of people thought that it was Photoshop. Not a thing involving it involves juxtaposing any of the buildings in here. This was taken from the 15th floor of the family court building, 4 blocks coming towards or away from your screen. And that's what I captured that day. I then found out that Julian Francis Abele was an extraordinary man. And I wanted to be able to tell other people who he was, especially children. But I also found out that a lot of adults had no clue as to who Julian Francis Abele was. This piece right now has gone through several changes or metamorphoses, and right now the piece is printed on metal, and I will pull up a photo of that. The metallic piece is now framed with a solid wood frame, so it's got some heft, and this particular version is 60 inches, 5 feet 2 inches tall and 42 inches wide. Last year, I gifted this piece to the Archdiocese of Philadelphia, and their headquarters is right there at the church or next door, and they now prominently display it in their newly renovated conference room. Okay, moving forward. In 2022, at the request of a friend of mine, it was suggested that I talk to the administration at Duke University, especially since I'm a member of the Philadelphia Athenaeum, and I was granted access to come down and take photos of any and all of the buildings that I wanted to that were done by Julian Abele. Well, heck, he darn near did the whole college, the East and West campus, as we know. But I wanted to capture some things that I could add some snippets about and share my photography with the viewers today. This obviously is his portrait in the administration building. I believe it's called the Allen Building. And I believe it was his design that was responsible for the Allen Building being constructed. I'm jumping straight over to Eden Cemetery because I think it's important to know that Julian is interred at a very special cemetery outside of Philadelphia. In fact, it's called Delaware County. This cemetery is on the National Registry. It is the resting place of persons like James the Priest, the nephew of the contralto Marian Anderson. She is also interred there. And many other individuals, including Cato, I can't remember his full name, but he is the only African-American who has a statue on the curve of the curve and curtain of the City Hall in Philadelphia, which is famous in itself. I wanted to share with you something that I believe is important. That is Julian's stone. And you'll see that it talks about a daughter that he lost, and she was 5 years old. They're interred in the same plot at Eden. This is the marital home, I should say, of Julian Francis Abele. It's located at 1515 Christian Street. It is in an area of Philadelphia that's undergoing some development that's upsetting to a lot of the folks who want to preserve this particular area of South Philadelphia. Doctors Row is one of the places that are along this street and in neighboring blocks. This is a 3,000 square foot plus building with 10 rooms. It is where Julian amassed his collection of fine art as well as fine furniture. This is a man who did, I think, was needlepoint. He did ironwork. He did a lot of things. He was clearly a Renaissance man. You'll notice here that there is a plaque which is remaining there today, indicating that it's on the National Registry. I want to share some little snippets about the photos that you're going to see here. Each of these are my photographs of Julian's buildings. The initial plan, and probably still is, the plan is to do a interactive PDF showing his buildings with my photography. Now, I got sidetracked from that project in that I now am concentrating a whole lot on the photographing of famous Black churches, two of which are Mother Emanuel in Charleston, South Carolina, and the 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. As I'm sure you're aware, both of those churches suffered great tragedies. The four little girls at 16th Street Baptist Church. And in Charleston in 2015, the church suffered the loss of my fraternity brother, Clementa Pinckney, state senator, and the pastor of Mother Emanuel. I only do exteriors of buildings. I kind of like what I see on the outside. Certainly, there's a lot of things that are inside buildings that I'm missing when it comes to Julian, but my preference is to take the exteriors of buildings. Now, what's so special about this building that was designed by Julian? The building, known as the Benjamin Franklin Hotel, was constructed by the Hotel Corporation, Benjamin Franklin Hotel Corporation, in 1922. In 1947, the year I was born, the hotel had a segregation policy. It was also the year that the Brooklyn Dodgers took on as one of their players the famous Hall of Famer Jackie Robinson. So when they came to Philadelphia, Jackie was not given a warm welcome. Matter of fact, it was some of the most despicable behavior on the part of others, including using the N-word, taunting him during play, spitting on him, just any number of things. So it's kind of ironic that here's a building that was done by Julian Francis Abele, and someone like Jackie Robinson was not permitted to even stay there. So the Dodgers did what they had to do, and they were housed at the Bellevue Stratford in Philadelphia, which is still an operating hotel. And eventually, before they left Brooklyn, anytime they came to Philadelphia, their home hotel was the Warwick Hotel. Well, I think it's quite clear that Horace Trumbauer was able to attract all these rich men of the Gilded Age, and they were certainly scions of industry. This is the Curtis Building, and it is in an area of Philadelphia that's not far from the Liberty Bell. As a matter of fact, it's, I think, 1 block away from there. And it is in a publishing area. The Curtis publishing area is right across the street this way. The Athenaeum main building is across the street to the left. And this building is the design of Julian Francis Abele. It is a renovated building, and we'll all remember the Saturday Evening Post, which used to be published, I think, several times a week. I was very fortunate that I had a dad who collected Saturday Evening Post in the house that me and my brothers and my one sister were raised in, and he put them in the wall of a shed. Lived in a row house in Norristown. So when he moved out of the neighborhood to a house still within Norristown, he took all of those Saturday Evening Posts out of the wall. And I inherited them as when my father died. It was one of the things that we were able to do, pick what you want, some of the personal things. And I always wanted those Saturday Evening Posts. There are some great articles in there. So I feel blessed that I'm able to capture a lot of history that we're not seeing in magazines these days. The next building is an interesting building. It is at 1200 Chestnut Street. It is the old Beneficial Savings Fund Society Bank. It was done by Julian in 1916, I believe. It is now owned by Drexel University School of Law, also known as the Thomas Klein building. It was gifted to Drexel in 2014. And Tom Klein, who is a very well-known nationally recognized civil lawyer and firm, donated $50 million for the naming rights. And this is where they have their advocacy classes. He completely renovated this building, bringing back some of its glory, including the vault. It's an interesting place. He does have a statue in another entrance on the side of this, on this street side. I can't remember what street that is. I'm now from Sarasota, so I'm forgetting a lot of those things. But it is a beautiful building, and he did a fine job of restoring it to its glory.
Now, Judge Rogers, we are going to have to pause there because we are out of time. And I think that is just a testament to how many Abele buildings there are to talk about, right? We'll have to keep everyone in suspense as they look forward to your website and possibly book, I hope, that you'll be building about your photography. Did you want to give any just last closing remark before we have to unfortunately move on to the next speaker?
No, I will make any and all of the 30-some photographs that I have available to anyone who wishes to download them.
Oh, amazing.
Time flies, doesn't it?
It does. It does. Again, like I said, I could listen to this all day. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your beautiful photography with us. And thanks again to Drek Wilson, Abele's biographer, for recommending you for today. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Now,
My pleasure.
you know, Mr. Rogers here noted that several of these buildings we got a peek at are on other university campuses, right? He mentioned Duke, he mentioned Drexel. So that's a perfect segue to our next speaker. If you look at the agenda at 10:40, we've got Mr. Bob Ashley, who is the immediate past board chair of the Museum of Durham History and a Duke University alum. So Bob is going to be able to speak to us to a current exhibit at the Museum of Durham History that mentions Julian Abele, and also Duke's exploration of their relationship with him, which has been ongoing much as ours has at Monmouth. So, Mr. Ashley, the floor is all yours. Got to see if, oh, we've just got to unmute Mr. Ashley. If you could go ahead and do that, you should be able to.
Yeah, I think we're back on. Let me get my screen back up here.
Perfect. Perfect.
Great. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you perfectly, but I'm not seeing your screen at the moment, FYI.
Oh, really? Okay, let me see what's going on here.
You should just be able to reshare. Do you see the bottom middle, that green button that says share?
Yeah, absolutely. I had lost that part of my screen, but we should be okay here.
Oh, okay.
Great. And let me get the right thing up here. Okay, here we go, I think.
Perfect. I see Julian Abele and Duke University. Yep.
Great. And let me see if I can. There we go. Okay. And
are you trying to get
also
into
slideshow?
Yep. There you go.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks. Sorry for that. Thanks, Melissa, for noticing our exhibit at the Museum of Durham History and inviting us to participate today. It's truly my pleasure to be here. When I was a Duke student and a journalist to boot back in the late 1960s, I'm pretty certain I never once heard the name Julian Abele, and the number of my classmates who were African-American barely numbered in the double digits. Fast forward more than 5 decades to when the Museum of Durham History, which I was a board member for 6 years, organized an exhibit in conjunction with Duke's centennial commemoration, an exhibit that focused on Duke and Durham, a special relationship. And of course, beyond a shadow of a doubt, one of the key faces we featured was that of Julian Abele, the man whose grand designs for the Duke campus are today a revered part of the face of Duke and the community with which it has enjoyed that special relationship for a century. The decades between my time on campus and this exhibit saw the universities and the community's acknowledgement and celebration of Abele flower from virtually non-existent to, among other tributes, the naming of the sprawling main quadrangle of Duke for the architect whose identity was so long in the shadows, his designs known mostly as those of the Philadelphia firm for which he worked as chief designer, Herbert Trumbauer and Associates. Abele came to his role on the Duke campus because of James B. Duke, the founder of American Tobacco Company and himself a formidable figure in the history of Durham, and the man whose 1924 endowment transformed small Trinity College into the distinguished university that's meant so much to Durham and the region. In 1909, Duke alumnus Susan Trift wrote in the Smithsonian in February 2005, Abele began work on a Manhattan mansion for Duke at the corner of 5th Avenue and 78th Street. 3 years later, when Duke, his pregnant wife, and 14 servants moved into the white marble residence modeled on the late 17th century Bordeaux Chateau, the New York Times designated the building as the costliest home on 5th Avenue. Duke followed the firm's work and was especially impressed with Winder Memorial Library at Harvard, dedicated in 1915 to the memory of Harry Elkins Winder, who had gone down with the Titanic. In 1924, when the president of Trinity College in Durham persuaded Duke to turn the school into a namesake university, the Trumbauer office got the nod, with Abele in the lead. Over the next 2 decades, Abele's designs enlarged and unified Duke's small existing East Campus and helped create a new West Campus a mile and a half away. Initial plans for a man-made lake and fountain never came to pass, but Abele was kept busy working on the library, School of Religion, football stadium and gymnasium, medical school, hospital, faculty houses, and of course, the chapel. Before looking at the evolution of Abele's recognition, it's worth noting that 2 of the buildings he designed, among the many he designed at Duke, are among those most closely identified with Duke in the broader public imagination, especially outside of Durham. One, of course, was the Duke Chapel, the towering church Duke envisioned. It truly is a majestic presence. The first winter, 2005, I was back in Durham, jogging up the approach to the chapel at night with snow falling. Was a riveting sight, even for a cynical, ink-stained wretch, taking a break from the newsroom. And there's the edifice that is probably even more widely viewed around the country, especially by television audiences with sports enthusiasm. Indoor Stadium, now Cameron Indoor Home Stadium, home to the Duke Blue Devils basketball teams. These days, a shrine to countless Duke fans and an evil temple to countless Duke haters. Back to the emerging portrait of Abele on campus. At the heart of his long near anonymity was the racism that permeated the South for generations. And of course, as earlier speakers have noted, was not unknown in the North either, but we perversely perfected it in the Southeast. The growing acknowledgement paralleled Duke's emergence from that heritage and the activism of the students that helped shape it. It's not that the relationship was unknown. As early as 1939, Duke historian William Blackburn noted in his The Architecture of Duke University in 1939 The book, archivist William King Writes in Julian Abele and the Design of Duke University, outlines the concepts of the principal designers. Blackburn gratefully acknowledged interviews with Trumbull and Abele. But his work was little noted until the mid-1980s. In the spring of 1986, a letter to the editor in the Duke Chronicle caught the eye of a sophomore, Abele's great-grandniece, Susan Cook. The letter, critical of the optics of shanties on the Chapel Quad, erected by students protesting South African apartheid, was for Cook a call to action, Tift wrote. She had told only a couple of her classmates that she was related to the man who had designed the Duke Chapel, indeed who had designed most of the original buildings on the school's neo-Gothic West Campus and many on its Georgian East Campus. She wrote, she had never met him, but she felt certain that when he were still alive, he would support the divestment rally as wholeheartedly as she did. So she penned an emotional rebuttal. Duke's beauty, she wrote, was an example of what a Black man can create given the opportunity. Her granduncle was a victim of apartheid in this country, who had conceived the Duke campus but had never seen it because of the Jim Crow laws in the segregated South. Whether Abele never saw the campus is, in fact, a matter of some doubt. There are secondhand accounts of at least one visit, but the belief that he may never have visited, and then only very quietly and discreetly, rings true in the South of the first decades of the 20th century, where signs designated water fountains as white or colored, and most hotels were off limit to blacks. Indeed, the campus enrolled its first African-American graduate students only in 1961, and its first undergraduates in 1963. Cook's letter spawned a growing interest in recognizing Abele's work. The University commissioned a portrait of Abele, unveiled in April 1989, and I noticed that Judge Rogers had a photograph of that hung in the Eldon building, which is where it was first hung. That was the last painting Abele was involved in designing, and it was completed 4 years after his death in 1950. The portrait was, Bill King noted, the first of an African-American displayed on campus. It has since been moved to the Gothic Reading Room, a majestic reading room on the second floor of the library that Abele designed on the main campus. In a 2017 extended essay, Bill King wrote, in the 1990s, recognition of Abele's contributions spread throughout North Carolina in a number of significant ways, including the UNC TV broadcast, Far-Fetched and Dear-Bought, for architects who changed North Carolina. One of them, of course, was Abele. An exhibit at Perkins Library in April and May 2000 marked the 75th anniversary of the founding of Duke. The most recent recognition came in 2016, when Duke trustees agreed to name Duke's main quadrangle as Abele Quad. Julian Abele brought the idea of Duke University to life, said then President Richard Broadhead. It is an astonishing fact that in the deepest days of racial segregation, a Black architect designed the beauty of this campus. Now everyone who lives, works, studies, and visits the heart of Duke's campus and will be reminded of Abele's role in its creation. About the same time, although I'm not exactly sure when, another plaque commemorating Abele's role was installed in the imposing Duke Chapel. And since I happened to be there during holiday season, you may have noticed it adorned by a wreath. But the plaque on the dedication of the quad was really a special moment for Duke and its recognition of Julian Abele. At the dedication of the quad in a plaque marketed in October of 2016, Julian Abele Jr., the architect's son, said, quote, I consider Duke University to be my father's finest work. As Duke Today reported in Campus News Service, speaking not far from the iconic Duke Chapel, of which his father oversaw the design. I've been on many fine campuses, Abele Jr. said, but I consider this to be the finest. My father would be very uneasy with all the attention. He hated to be in the limelight, but he was proud of his work at Duke. Interesting, one of several others speaking that day underscored how, even as Abele's role became better known through the 80s and 90s on campus and beyond, the story still had not permeated the university community. Quote, "This was truly a day Julian Abele made," said Danielle Squires, class of 2002 and president of Duke Black Alumni, according to Duke Today. She went on, "When I was a student here, there were rumors about a Black architect who made the chapel, but I didn't know of him, although I should have known about him. I didn't know he was part of the Duke narrative. I did know that the chapel lines were comforting to me." Rain that day abated just before the dedication ceremony. That rain was tears of joy from Julian Abele. "Looking down on us," said then Duke Trustee Chair and venture capitalist David Rubenstein, who, by the way, has probably been the second greatest contributor to Duke since James B. Duke. In closing the ceremony, Rubenstein said, "Abele Quad is at the center of the campus. It's hard not to go through it. Every time you do, you'll see Julian Abele's name, and I'm hopeful you'll think about what he did and how difficult it was for him to do it. I hope you will remember this as one of the most important Duke events you go to. And I would add, you'll be reminded both of Abele's magnificent work and the shadows that for so long enshrouded it." Thank you for listening. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Ashley. As I said at the outset, it's always so interesting to hear about how other campuses who have an Abele building, or in this case, many Abele buildings, are honoring his legacy. So we do have some time for questions from the audience. You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat and I would be happy to ask it for you. While people are perhaps typing their questions or looking for the unmute button, I will just, it's more of a comment than a question. You noted that Abele was said to be such a humble person who perhaps was sometimes uncomfortable in the spotlight. And I know that's something that I've talked about at great length with Drek Wilson, who is Abele's biographer here on the call. So that was very interesting to me. I wonder if you could comment a little more about the family's involvement in Duke's efforts over the years.
The Abele's family?
Yes.
Yeah. Beyond their support of it, and certainly their contributions to the dedication of the quad, I'm not too familiar with what that involvement may have been. I know they were very excited during the 80s and 90s that Duke was beginning to recognize what Julian had done. I think they were somewhat chagrined, from what I understand, that he had not had much attention over the years.
Wonderful, thanks. Other questions or comments from the audience? You can type your question in the chat, or I would be happy to ask it for you.
While people are pondering that, I would note when I went looking for the Abele Quad plaque that's on the screen right now, I frankly overlooked it at first. I know Duke celebrates it as being a prominent spot on campus. It happens to be on the ground. And as you can see, it looks like it's been, probably needs a cleaning. I'm hoping that they will do that at some point.
That is the thing, right? Once we memorialize someone, we've got to then maintain that that connection, that celebration. Other questions from the audience? I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about the exhibit specifically. What do people see if they come visit the museum?
Sure, and it's mostly about the Duke-Durham relationship. This is this is the panel on the founding. Beyond that, there are a number, and I can put a link in the chat. Well, it's not online actually, but they'll see a number of plaques and displays about Duke's relationship and contribution to the community. It obviously has been central, fundamental in Durham's evolution, and it celebrates that closeness. It looks at some of the examples off campus and on that Duke has made a contribution, and talks about some of the people, Abel among them. And much of it is stories about people on campus and in the community who had a profound impact on both the university and the town.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. One last call for any questions if anybody wants to unmute. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Ashley. So moving right along,
Thank you.
our next speaker, as I said earlier, we like to talk about the things that are ongoing on our Monmouth University campus, things that are happening with regard to Julian Abele elsewhere in the world. And then we like to shine light on some other untold local history stories in Julian Abele's honor. So if we look at our schedule now, it's 11 o'clock and we have Diane Shelton from Interfaith Neighbors in Asbury Park, who's going to talk to us a bit about one of these untold history projects, the Springwood Avenue Heritage Walk. So let's see where Diane is in the Zoom room here. Diane, you should have the ability to unmute and then to share your slides.
Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you, Melissa. Greetings to everyone. And it is my pleasure to return this year to give an update regarding the Springwood Avenue Heritage Walk that was initially presented during the symposium last year. I would like to say thank you, Mr. Ashley, because some of our research was found in the archives at Duke University. Springwood Avenue, the project area of focus, is situated in the southwestern part of the city with a region referred to as the West Side. The present-day West Side neighborhood spans approximately 0.38 square miles, and Springwood Avenue was once the West Side's primary commercial hub, featuring a lively stretch of shops, churches, taverns, and eateries. The avenue experienced significant prosperity, and buildings ranging from 2 to 3 stories along Springwood Avenue were vibrant centers of activity and trade. And the demographic makeup of the neighborhood was of Italian, Jewish, and African American heritage. From the 1930s to the 1970s, Springwood Avenue experienced a heyday as a commercial and cultural hub. Former residents interviewed decades later described Springwood as, quote, unquote, Little Harlem, and an area on par with almost any jazz neighborhood in any city in the country. Springwood Avenue was not just a place for living and shopping. There were events that residents would remember decades later. Schools and churches held talent shows, and clubs hosted live music. Major figures from James Brown to Count Basie performed there and played with residents, making themselves a part of the community. Area organizations like the Elks Lodge held parades for major holidays. Growing up on the Springwood Avenue meant being surrounded by batoon twirling, dancing, and music, and most of all, community. It meant being a part of a creative community, meeting its own needs and building its own prosperity. So what happened? Glad you asked. Well, like many other urban cities across our nation between 1968 and 1970, civil unrest erupted. And in July 1970, as a result, Springwood Avenue was left barren with boarded up dwellings and vacant properties. The economic and social life of the Asbury Park West Side came to a startling halt. What was no longer, and what remained was a desolate community for over 40 years. From 1973 until 2011, Not a single permit was pulled for any new commercial building on that side of our city until the Springwood Center was constructed on the corner of Springwood and DeWitt Avenues, a partnership between Interfaith Neighbors, the City of Asbury Park, and the New Jersey Natural Gas and other funding sources. A community needs assessment survey, a part of Interfaith Neighbors' public outreach and engagement, revealed that 86% of residents valued public art and considered the West Side's culture as one of the neighborhood's biggest strengths. As such, Interfaith Neighbors' Wells Fargo Regional Foundation plan included the development of a heritage walk to showcase the West Side's culture as an element in its placemaking component for the 5-year implementation grant. For almost 6 years, the majority of the research about Springwood Avenue businesses was done by Nina Summerlin of Westside Citizens United and I, with many photos shared by Madonna Carter, whose father was a well-known photographer. As a non-historian, it became somewhat frustrating to me as the business owners, the business name, and or their geographic locations may have changed. I continually repeated to myself the scripture that says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. And I am so thankful that the City of Asbury Park Transportation Manager in September of last year sent me an email regarding the North Jersey Transportation Planning Authority program entitled Vibrant Places. And at that time, the application was due in 4 days. It was submitted and was awarded with meetings beginning with the Allen M. Voorhees Transportation Center at Rutgers, U, and Interfaith Neighbors. In addition, other local stakeholders and partners were invited to become a part of the local Heritage Walk Committee. And that included Asbury Park African American Music Project, the Communications Department at Monmouth U, Asbury Park Museum, Westside Citizens United, and of course, the City of Asbury Park. For approximately 6 to 8 months, qualitative research or a thematic analysis was used by Rutgers to identify, analyze, and interpret patterns or themes within data provided by the local committee, such as pictures, interviews, surveys, or text messages with former and current residents and local historians. Vibrant Places program project team worked diligently to develop this virtual tour for the Springwood Avenue Heritage Walk. This tour is a component of the larger Cultural Heritage Walk envisioned for the West Side neighborhood, and it aims to highlight the corridor's history before 1970s and use placemaking as a tool to celebrate its legacy and to commemorate the vibrancy of the Springwood Avenue community to present-day audiences. The tour is broken down into 6 blocks, and I thank my intern here for sharing the visual. Here is broken down into 6 blocks. I think she has been going through them to show you the different components here. Okay. Okay, thank you. I will say, go to the very last. Okay, Springwood Avenue Community Stories. This is where everyone gets to share and be a part of the Heritage Walk. They can enter their own stories. There's a place that they can enter their own pictures that they may have. Okay. Do we have any there? Let me see. Okay. That's one of the famous Elks parades. So they can add pictures here. Okay. So it's been a long and tedious planning and putting together, but I'm so thankful again, like for Vibrant Places, because they provided the technical assistance that we needed to put this together. We see it as, well, we're already working on how to make this the physical location. We're looking at flags for lamppost flags. We're looking at what are we looking at? We're looking at other placemaking items that can be going, that will be up and down Springwood Avenue. We're looking for we're looking to include all this on Springwood Avenue. I will also say that the New Jersey chapter of the American Planning Association just informed us that Springwood Avenue Heritage Walk has been selected to receive the 2024 Outstanding Community Engagement Award, and we'll be receiving that on Thursday. Okay. Thank you. So it took a lot of work. We finally made it this far. I'm farther along than when I spoke to you, everyone, in 2023, and I'm excited about this. I think it's just best for me to ask if there's any questions.
Oh, I had to get myself unmuted. That was just wonderful. Thank you so much. You know, there's so much great work being done out there that I try not to repeat speakers year to year, but you had such tremendous success that I knew we had to have you back. And I am so grateful that you were able to join us. Congratulations on getting so much accomplished, and congratulations on your award. That was exciting.
Yes, yes, it was.
To hear that announcement today. So congratulations.
Thank you, Melissa.
For anyone on the call who might be doing similar work, I think a barrier is always funding, right? Where are you going to find the money to get your projects done? I know you went through a few sources. Can you just talk to us a little more about how was it an easy process? Was it a difficult process? Where the different sources you found that perhaps might be helpful to others?
Okay. To me, it was not an easy process. I'm not a historian, so digging up the background and trying to find all the information from the civil unrest on down and business locations, that was very difficult for me. I know she's on the line. Nina Summerlin was a great help. And then when others came on, like the museum and AP Amp, they helped with a lot of the stories that they had, a lot of photos that they had. We really did not need financial backing as of up to now. Because the grant we received from the Vibrant Places took care of all the research. Now we were starting to try to do fundraisers and find monies for all the other different things that we want to add to make it a physical site on Springwood Avenue. You're muted.
That's got to happen once per Zoom program, right? That you think you're talking and you're not. I love that there's the ability to crowdsource here, that anybody can share their story and their photos. But I'm curious, is there then like a vetting process that you put everything through where you have to double check the content that is submitted before it goes live in any way?
Oh, yeah. We will vet. Right now, we're still setting up the Archives because Rutgers had it, so we're setting it up now so that I take ownership of this virtual and we can make changes. And we will definitely vet any input and make sure that it is respectful and something that it should be read by others.
Perfect, because that's a whole another layer of work, right? You said it hasn't cost too much money thus far, but it's very clearly a labor of love because you've put a tremendous amount of time into working on this project, and that continues now as you vet the additions to it.
So hopefully in 2 years, I'll be talking to you about what's actually up and down Springwood.
Yes. Well, I do. I love this dual use of both virtual and person, right? Because there are different audiences that each will serve. And so I think it's, so dynamic that you intend to have both, right? For people who are there, there's that literal physical placemaking. But for folks who may not be able to come to Asbury Park, this is in many ways national history. And so
Yeah.
they can access it from wherever they are without any barriers. Can you talk a little bit about why that was so important to you and how this is in many ways national history?
Well, one, because a lot of the residents have moved since 1970 and they have history. It's an easy way for them to share. A lot of residents, as I said before, felt that the culture of Springwood Avenue needed to be shared. As we all know, with changes and gentrification and all that, the neighborhoods are changing, and the residents felt it was important to reserve the history. So this way, whether they are walking, which we like to think that people are walking because of our health and everybody's talking about getting out and exercising, but eventually walking and seeing the sights, though what was there, would be very beneficial. And if they can't do that, they can always go online.
Awesome. Awesome. So I'll open the floor. Any questions from the audience? You have the ability to unmute and ask a question, or you can type your question in the chat and I'd be happy to read it for you.
Miss Davis, this is Drek Wilson. I would be very much interested in knowing or finding out what is the architectural history of the avenue. I noticed in your images that there are a variety of building types, shops, retail stores, churches, and my guess is that there is a rich story behind those buildings. And if you have the opportunity, I would encourage you to look at the research that would apply to the various buildings along the avenue and the architects who designed those buildings and the business people who actually developed those buildings. One of the organizations which is you should become familiar with is the National Trust for Historic Preservation. And the trust has a grant program specifically for African American history and heritage.
Say the name of that organization again, please.
National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, that's awesome, Drek. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's very helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the audience? Okay.
This is Kay. I just wanted to also applaud Diane. She did an excellent job in spearheading this. And we'll try to assist you as well with the architectural, maybe with that part of it in terms of researching the architect of the buildings there. So kudos, Diane. We're very proud of you.
And thank you so much for being part of all this, Kay.
Mm-hmm.
Kay is the director of the Asbury Park African American Museum.
No, Asbury Park Museum.
I'm sorry, Asbury Park Museum.
Although there is a lot of emphasis, in fact, what part of our mission is to ensure that we're capturing the entire diverse history of Asbury Park. So absolutely has an emphasis on the West Side and African American, but I just want to clarify that we do represent all of Asbury Park.
Yes, you do.
Okay.
Yes, Kay Harris is another local history hero for sure. So thanks for all you do, Kay. All right. Well, Diane, thank you so much. That was wonderful. We wish you much continued success. I'm sure there's many other awards in your future in addition to the one you're about to receive later this week. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, so if you look at your schedule, next up is another local history site, another instance where we are using Abel's name to help tell other untold stories. In this case, this is a site that is very near and dear to my heart, and it is one that is currently on the New Jersey Black Heritage Trail that we referenced earlier. As I noted, we're trying to get the Great Hall on that trail. Well, this is a site that was in the inaugural class. So we're going to have Fred Carl, Herman Red, and I think perhaps some others from the InfoAge Science and History Museums at the Camp Evans National Historic Landmark in Wall Township. They're going to be talking to us a little bit about their ongoing oral histories of Camp Evans and Fort Monmouth as the nation's, quote, Black Brain Center. So Fred et al., I'll leave it to you.
Hello, Melissa. Thank you very much. We are so pleased to be here. I will go into slideshow mode. All right. This is sort of our quest that started in 1982. And here's our main panel from our exhibit. And here are some of the faces that were teased out of photographs from the past. And it's really a wonderful story. Here's the site that contains the story. And the existence of this site is a miracle. There are hundreds of people, Melissa included. I added the National Trust for Historic Preservation. They saved us at one time. Congressman Smith saved it at one time. The New Jersey SHPO. It took a lot of players, lawyers, and dedicated people to make sure this historic site didn't turn into homes and industrial park. And in sending the invite around, I didn't know how it works. So there's multiple Freds on the screen. So we're doing a little bit. Remember that game show, What's My Line? We're mimicking that today. So now here's sort of our story. It's one of passing the baton from one generation to the next. And it's, as far as we can trace back, it started in 1982 with Wilhelmina Mitchell creating a story and having it published. And then it was picked up by Thomas Daniels, who magnified it and collected more information. And he sort of set the tone for us and hopefully those who follow, that many of the current books don't mention persons of color in technology and high-end professional fields. And his goal was to dispel that. So then we come along to Robert Johnson Jr. of Framingham College, now university, and he got a grant from the New Jersey Historical Commission, and he did a series of oral histories, and we're very thankful that he did, because most of the people he interviewed are no longer available for interviews. And his goal was to do a DVD, and that turned into his goal was to do a CD, and that turned into a DVD, No Short Climb. And now Robert Johnson has a book in the works. And, our team is happy to bring his work forward. And Herman will talk about the goals of the team a little later on. at InfoAge in our main Marconi building in the foyer, we have a wall of honor, and those are a series of plaques, and we have a dinner in our excellent Marconi dining room. This is our chairman, Mike Rowane, and this is his baby. He gets us together every year, and a committee decides who would be honored that year, and some of our committee members are honored, and it's really happy. People who, because of security reasons and top secret clearance, had to work in obscurity, and their families pretty much never knew what they did. And we have seen tears well up in the eyes of older participants, because, as one put it, goes, my whole life I couldn't say what I did, and now I can tell my family and my friends and my grandchildren what I did. And that's sort of the position our team members and the people on the wall are. Okay. Now, this is part of the reason, besides the history, why we're one of the first sites on the New Jersey Black History Trail. It's because of this wonderful presentation. And, we got a lot of stuff together, collected a lot of photographs, but this wonderful professional presentation is due to Professor Ziobro, I'm happy to be able to call her Melissa, my friend. And Melissa, if you can find your unmute button, say a few words how this happened.
Sure. So Fred told me roughly 7 minutes ago that I was going to be speaking today, but always happy to speak on behalf of InfoAge and Camp Evans. For those of you that have never heard of this site, Camp Evans was a sub-installation of Fort Monmouth, and I was the last Fort Monmouth command historian prior to the base closure. So I was there from 2004 to 2011. So this is a history that I know very well, and I am, happy to serve on the board of InfoAge. Not that I get to do much. I wish I could do more, but I do serve on the board. In any event, I knew that there was this incredible story about Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans being this, quote, Black Brain Center, where scientists and engineers of color from across the country could come and work when other institutions, and blocked their doors to them. And so when Monmouth University started its diversity and innovation grants, those grants were available to help advance projects looking at different themes of diversity, equity, inclusion on campus and off. So I put in for a grant to help professionally revamp the Black History and Heritage Room at InfoAge and tell this story that has been being documented, being built up by others going back decades, in a very visually engaging and dynamic way. There's another Monmouth University tie here, and that is that Dr. Walter McAfee, who is one of these key heroes in history. He works for decades at Fort Monmouth and Camp Evans, and he is perhaps most famous for doing the mathematical calculations that make possible man's first contact with the moon in Project Diana. In any event, Dr. McAfee was also a professor at Monmouth College at the time, and mentored generations of science students at Monmouth College. So we put in for a diversity and innovation grant. Thank you so much to Dr. Zanetta Rago-Craft and everyone who works that grant program. And it allowed us to, revamp this room, tell this story, and as Fred said, ultimately get Camp Evans on the New Jersey Black History and Heritage Trail. Fred, did I touch on all the points you hoped I would?
Excellent. I can see why you are an extra special professor.
I was putting it back in your lap. Thank you.
All right. It is so nice to have Herman Red with us today. Herman is one of the honorees, and he has a long history that, like many, he couldn't share with his family, but he could when honored at the Wall of Honor. And I invite Herman to say a few words, because he is the leader of our oral history group. Herman, if you would, please.
Okay, excuse me. I've been very honored to be a part of this whole endeavor, and it was really fascinating to come alive and to have the group come together when we were doing, Melissa and the InfoAge folks were doing the expansion of the museum or the exhibit area. They did a terrific job, and we were able to become a part of that and help out in our little way. But it turned out extremely well. It's an excellent expansion. We had a lot of excitement from not only the guys that work there and many of the group that we have today now working the expansion of it were also employees, engineers from Fort Monmouth. And so they, oops, excuse me, I didn't turn off everything. Uh, but I started there, and one of the top guys that at Fort Monmouth at the time was an engineer named Tom Daniels. Tom really, I should back up just one and say that what the new group that Fred is helping works with us on, this Black group, our job is to pick up where Melissa left off, and Melissa was good enough to train us in how to do oral histories and what have you. So we're doing quite a bit of that, or trying to anyway. But she got us started. We found out that there's magic to it, but as long as you follow the instructions. And she gave us a nice seminar and moving out on doing that, and that's working well for us. So we meet periodically and try to continue what started. Also, we expanded. It was technical guys initially, the engineers initially that got credit for a lot of stuff. But what we found out was that there are a lot of more folks involved, black folks involved in helping to make our success, their success. And what you see is the group that we have together now, and they're great guys. All of them are engineers at Fort Monmouth, and they had. I'd been approached by one of the gentlemen there, Clinton Brown, and Clinton was asking for a project, something that they could do to help out. And the timing was perfect because Melissa and the InfoAge folks were finishing up, and so we were able to participate there. And they were smart enough to say, okay, since you guys are got it going and you're starting out, you can be the nucleus of keeping it going and expanding it. And like you said, one of the things we wanted to do, we were top heavy in engineers to look out and see all of the other folks of color who had participated and helped make a lot of the projects successful. So that's what we're doing now. It's really working out extremely well. I think I better shut up. Okay.
Thank you very much, Herman.
Mhm.
And now we're going to mention the hero of the class, and that is Dr. McAfee. And he is an amazing standout. He was recognized by Dr. Henry Louis Gates of Harvard, and they published a little biography of him in a pamphlet called Little Known Black History Facts. And Dr. Gates was kind enough, and so was McDonald's Corporation, to allow us to feature this on our website and in some of our publications. And then added on top of that, here is Dr. McAfee getting an award from President Eisenhower. To get an award from a president of the United States is awesome for anybody. At this time frame, being a person of color, to get an award handed to you for a scholarship by the President of the United States meant, you were godlike. I'll be silly there. But long time forward, we were given the opportunity to recommend a post office be named in honor of one of the Camp Evans persons. and it wasn't a hard one. It was Dr. McAfee. So the post office that delivered his mail to his door is now named in his honor. And Congressman Smith enabled that. And at the bottom right is the ceremony where his friends, family, and InfoAge members were under a tent across from the post office marking the event. And this is not the first event that Monmouth University has featured Dr. McAfee. Here was one in the past. And there's the unveiling of a sign that we will reproduce that in front of the Diana site one of these days. Our next family or couple is Mary and Harold Tate. And I was fortunate enough to meet them, and they told me their story. And I have to admit, I left their house with tears in my eyes because it was such a story of like the ability to overcome hurdle after hurdle. And it started when they were dating down south, and they were rocking on a rocker on her mom's porch, and they made a pact that they were going to get an education and leave the South. And they were both the children of sharecroppers, and they did it. And it's an amazing story. And here is Mr. Tate in a publication that was featured in the New York Times, or a photograph in the New York Times in the 1960s. And it was a good thing for the Army to present a person of color to the public to show the power of individuals who work hard and overcome hurdles. Next is William B. Gould. He is also on the Wall of Honor. He is a member of the Royal Order of Sputnik Chasers, which when Sputnik popped on the sky, he was part of the team who characterized and tracked that invader from the Soviet Union. And Dr. Harold Zoll gave the members of this voluntary group a diploma, and we proudly feature his diploma as an artifact at Camp Evans. And because he was a special individual, one of his friends and devotee, John Dilks, did an excellent article in QST because Mr. Gould was a ham, and his son is a professor out at Stanford, and it's fun to work with him on information about his dad. Now I think Herman can talk about this gentleman who we sit with every other week. Take it away, Herman.
Okay, well, Donald is online here, so he said he would be glad to say a few words. Donald, can you just
Sure.
light up?
Yeah, what you see up on the screen is an emblem from Lake Placid Winter Olympics in 1980. And I took an active participation in that using the RIMBAS system, which is remotely monitored surveillance system, to install sensors from that system around the Olympic Village at Lake Placid. And it was really an amazing thing that I was involved with, and I'm very honored to have been selected to participate in this event. We placed the sensors around the Olympic Village, and which were there to prevent terrorists from doing any harm to the athletes inside the village. And you see one individual there, Bruce Springsteen. He had one of the RIMBAS caps, which I gave Melissa the one I had. So it was a good thing. And I don't have much more to say. If there's any questions, I'll try to answer.
Excellent. Thank you, Donald. And notice the hat. And there's a song out there where the hat was in. It's called Glory Days.
That's right.
It's how do you pick the glory days of Camp Evans with Marconi, World War I, World War II, and this piece from the Cold War.
Mhm.
And in a room at Camp Evans, I've been told that this project was born in the USA, but more specifically in the Marconi Hotel. So there's a couple of dad jokes for you.
That's good.
Herman will talk about Willie Johnson Jr.
Willie's another one. We came along about the same time in the 60s, but Willie has done very well. Willie was in the radar and combat ID arena and had several significant projects that he had worked on. He was also recognized for InfoAge. And Willie is still with us, so he's one of some of us old guys. We're still around to be able to add some personal knowledge of knowing some of the stalwarts like Dr. McAfee and Tom Daniels.
Excellent, thank you.
Now,
there's your mentor.
All right, yeah. Tom Daniels was, I call him the Renaissance guy. Really an outstanding engineer, fast tracker. He was immediately recognized by Fort Monmouth as a guy who really was doing a lot. He moved along very fast. He kind of started out as a regular engineer, but he's got in the fast track and moved up to senior level positions. A part of that was that Tommy advanced to what we call a senior executive service. So he spent some time at Fort Monmouth, but he went to the Pentagon. And one of the things that I liked about him being in the Pentagon is when you know somebody who was your mentor and what have you, and he's now in the Pentagon. When you go in the Pentagon, if you don't know somebody in there, you're just walking around halls. But if you know a guy who is general officer level, you can get inside. So it was really nice to be able to, when we visit the Pentagon, to drop in and see Tom. But Tom was also he was recognized by Monmouth University. He has an honorary doctorate from there, but he was a strong civic leader. He helped all of us guys as much as he could. And let's see what else. And the main thing about Tommy was that Tommy really was a guy that was fostering the recognition of Black achievement at Fort Monmouth. So many of our documents and things came from Tommy, who was a great spokesman, but he also collected information and provided all of that to us. So he gave us a pretty good glimpse of knowledge of which people we ought to be looking at, and that we should continue this effort. Unfortunately, we lost him before he finished his work, but nevertheless, he did an outstanding job of supporting us with this.
Thank you so much, gentlemen. We're going to have to break it there, Fred. I'm sorry, but we've got one last speaker to fit in. So please, Fred, if you want to give any last closing remarks.
Well, to be shameless, please visit InfoAge Wednesdays, Saturdays, Sundays, noon to 5 p.m. And thank you, Melissa, for having us. We really appreciate it and are happy. Thanks.
Thank you, Fred, Mr. Blue, Mr. Red. We're so grateful to have you. Really appreciate it. So that concludes the portion of the event that looks at other untold stories in Julian Abele's honor. And we've made something of a tradition with wrapping up this symposium with a presentation from Tim Orr. Tim is the university's executive director for campus planning and facilities management. I always say to Tim, he is responsible for preserving this National Historic Landmark, but he also has 50-something other buildings that he's responsible for. So I am especially grateful for his wonderful care and stewardship of Julian Abele's masterpiece. So Tim's going to provide an update on some of the preservation work that's going on at the Great Hall.
Thank you, Melissa. Good morning, everyone. I have to say that the Great Hall is my favorite building on campus out of all of them. So I really enjoy the chance to concentrate on that building when we have to make repairs or when we're able to update anything that has to do with the Great Hall. Last year, I had mentioned that we applied for a grant from the New Jersey Historic Trust to fund the replacement of the electric throughout the Great Hall. The New Jersey Historic Trust had approved to the first ever 3-phase matching grant for this project at $750,000 per phase. So we had begun last December in the president's office over Christmas break with that project. We currently we're continuing the first phase. We replaced the electric on the 3rd floor and 4th floors. We are currently on the 2nd floor on the west end, and we will be moving over to the east end in a number of weeks, and then continuing downward to the 1st floor. This for some background information, this project involves not only the replacement of all the electrical panels throughout the building, but all of the wiring, the switches, the outlets. It also includes refurbishment of all 1,053 light fixtures throughout the building. So we currently, from the 3rd and 4th floor, we have removed 157 of those fixtures and have delivered them to Aurora Lampworks out of New York for them to begin the refurbishment. We have temporary fixtures in place while that refurbishment is being completed. We also have an additional 46 light fixtures that we just pulled out of the 2nd floor that are ready to go up to New York. As part of this project, the common space lighting will also be controlled by a lighting system designed to help save energy. So that is an important part of what the university is tasked to do with sustainability. The last board meeting of the New Jersey Historic Trust was actually held in Great Hall in the auditorium, and they approved the release of the 2nd phase funding of $750,000. So that's great news. So we will be continuing with that. We will also be applying to the New Jersey Historic Trust in April to hopefully receive further funding to continue with the electrical project. It has been found that it's more expensive than what we had initially budgeted for. So we hope to apply for additional funding and get that funding to continue to move forward with this project. We also we just applied on December 5th to the New Jersey Economic Development Authority for their Historic Preservation Reinvestment Program to help fund the reconstruction of the main entrance and the fountains in Erlanger Gardens. If you've been to campus, you notice that the front entrance has that netting across the top of it. It's a safety netting. So in case any stones come loose, they don't fall on anyone. And if you've noticed the fountains in Erlanger Gardens, you've noticed that they're actually a portion of them are being held together by scaffolding planks and straps. So it's critical that we get this funding to help us move forward with those two projects. Those two projects would be approximately $5.3 million. And this New Jersey Economic Development Authority grant would provide up to 40% as a tax credit, and then we would sell that tax credit to 85 to 90 cents on the dollar. So certainly, last but not least, Monmouth is partnering with Johnson Controls to perform a campus-wide energy audit, and as part of a campus-wide energy project. As part of that project, we will be replacing the boilers in Great Hall, along with all the steam traps, valves, actuators. We will be updating the building HVAC control system so that the system works as it was originally designed. As if you've been in Great Hall, it might seem a little warm in there. We've had issues in the past because a lot of these actuators, a lot of these controllers are almost 100 years old. And believe it or not, there are some that are still in place that still work, which is absolutely amazing to me. Needless to say, we are continuing to stay extremely busy with maintaining Julian Abele's masterpiece here on our campus. We feel blessed to have it here. It's an amazing building. It's with an amazing building comes an amazing task to continue to maintain it and keep it as beautiful as it was when it was first built. If you have any questions, I'm willing to answer any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tim. I hear somebody was starting to ask a question. Sorry, go ahead.
Tim, this is Drek Wilson.
Hi, Drek.
Do you have copies of the original construction plans?
We do. The actual blueprints.
Right.
They're sitting in facilities management.
Oh, okay. Excellent.
We also have digital copies for easy access, so we're not continually touching those so that they don't fall apart, because they are very delicate. They are filed away. So we've digitized the main drawings so that when we have any issues, we're able to look them up on the computer and get the information that we need from the computer so that we can help preserve those drawings.
Okay, excellent.
Drek, you're taking it easy on Tim. I can't believe that was your only question as Julian Abele's biographer.
We just had to remove 4 murals in our financial aid office. Unfortunately, they were damaged due to a leak. So we have them removed and preserved, and they will be restored off campus. And we are working on trying to locate that leak. Some of the design is the gutters throughout the perimeter of the building. The leaders go into the building. So sometimes, you know, being almost 100 years old, you have sometimes you have some leaks. So we have to be, sometimes you have to think outside the box on how to get to those and repair those. So we are currently working on that now while they're being restored, and then they will be reinstalled after we confirm that the repairs that we've made have worked and there's no further damage. We did have the mirror inside the passenger elevator was cracked, so we had a restoration company come out and they removed that mirror. And they redid all the painting on the backside of the mirror and restored that for us. And that turned out great. It looks amazing. Matches exactly to what was there. Mm-hmm. So it's unfortunately some things happen like that when you're using the building. But it's great to have the ability to be able to replace that in kind as required by the New Jersey Historic Trust. So anytime anything is damaged in the building, anything that has to be replaced, as it was done originally, or the same material type that was used. That sometimes proves to be a little difficult, but we've been able to get through it and been able to take care of anything that has come our way. So.
Any other questions for Tim? You can unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can type it in the chat, and I'd be happy to read it for you. Okay, well, Tim's going to get off relatively easy there. Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Tim.
everyone. Appreciate
And
it.
that concludes our annual celebration of Julian Abele and his life and legacy and impact on Monmouth University and beyond. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and I hope we see you next year. Have a great day. Bye.
Bye-bye.